Letitia Johnson had been putting off going to the doctor for nearly 3 weeks now. The pain in her lower abdomen started as a dull ache that she could mostly ignore. As an elementary school teacher, she was used to pushing through discomfort. There were always 28 eager third graders waiting for her, and substitute teachers were hard to come by. But this morning, when she doubled over while helping one of her students with a math problem, she knew she couldn't wait any longer. "You really need to get that checked out," said Denise, the school nurse who had found Letitia breathing heavily in the staff bathroom during lunch break. "That kind of pain isn't normal, especially since it's been getting worse." Letitia nodded, clutching her side. "I know. I've been trying to convince myself it's just stress or something I ate." 3 weeks isn't food poisoning," Denise said firmly, handing her a cup of water. "Promise me you'll call for an appointment today." Back in her classroom, Letitia pulled out her phone during quiet reading time and called the city hospital to schedule an appointment. The earliest they could fit her in was 2 days later. She texted her husband Andre about the appointment. "Want me to come with you?" he replied almost immediately. Letitia considered it. Andre was busy with an important case at his law firm, and she didn't want to bother him for what was probably nothing serious. "No need, babe. I'm sure it's fine. Just wanted to let you know." "Call me right after," he wrote back, adding a heart emoji. The 2 days passed slowly, with the pain growing more persistent. By the time Thursday afternoon arrived, Letitia was having trouble standing straight. She drove herself to the hospital anyway, gripping the steering wheel tightly at each twinge of pain. The waiting room was crowded when she arrived. Letitia filled out the paperwork, noting her symptoms and medical history carefully. She had always been healthy, rarely needing to visit doctors aside from her annual checkups. The wait was nearly an hour, and she spent it shifting uncomfortably in the hard plastic chair, trying to find a position that eased the pain. Letitia Johnson? A nurse in blue scrubs finally called her name, leading her to a small examination room where she took Letitia's vitals and asked her to describe her symptoms. "The pain started about 3 weeks ago," Letitia explained. "It's in my lower right abdomen and it's been getting worse. Sometimes it spreads to my back. I've had some nausea too, especially in the mornings." The nurse nodded, typing notes into the computer. "The doctor will be in shortly," she said before leaving. Letitia sat on the examination table, the paper crinkling beneath her. The room was cold, and she wrapped her arms around herself, partly for warmth and partly for comfort. Another 20 minutes passed before there was a brief knock and the door swung open. Dr. Reynolds didn't look up from the tablet in his hands as he entered. He was a tall man in his 50s with graying hair and thin-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, still scrolling through what she assumed was her chart. "What brings you in today?" Letitia repeated her symptoms, adding details about how the pain had intensified in the past few days. "It's worst in the morning and at night," she explained. "And nothing seems to help. Not over-the-counter pain medicine, not heat packs, nothing." Dr. Reynolds finally looked up, his eyes meeting hers briefly before returning to the tablet. "Any chance you could be pregnant?" "No," Letitia replied confidently. "That's not possible right now." The doctor made a small sound and asked a few more routine questions about her diet and sleep habits. He seemed distracted, barely acknowledging her detailed descriptions of the pain. "Lie back, please," he instructed, approaching to press on her abdomen. His examination was quick, too quick, Letitia thought. When he pressed on the spot where the pain was worst, she winced sharply. "Tender there?" he asked, already moving away. "Yes, very," Letitia said. "It's been getting worse every day. Could it be my appendix? My friend had similar symptoms and—" Dr. Reynolds was already shaking his head. "Appendicitis presents differently. The pain would be more acute." He returned to the computer, typing briefly. "You're probably just experiencing some stress-related digestive issues. Teaching can be quite demanding, especially with young children." Letitia frowned. "But this doesn't feel like stress. Something feels really wrong." The doctor's expression didn't change. Women often experience abdominal pain related to hormonal changes or stress. "It's very common." His tone was dismissive, almost bored. "I can prescribe you some mild pain relievers, and I suggest you try to get more rest. Maybe take a day off work." "I've already tried pain relievers," Letitia insisted. "They don't help. And this doesn't feel like normal pain. It's sharp and it's getting worse." Dr. Reynolds sighed almost imperceptibly. "Mrs. Johnson, I understand you're uncomfortable, but there's nothing in your examination that suggests anything serious. Some patients tend to have a lower pain threshold or perceive normal discomfort as more severe than it is. Letitia felt her cheeks grow warm. Was he suggesting she was exaggerating? I'm not imagining this pain, she said firmly. Something is wrong. I didn't say you were imagining it, Dr. Reynolds replied, his tone now tinged with impatience. But in my professional opinion, this is likely stress-related gastritis or possibly irritable bowel syndrome. We see this frequently in people under pressure. He was already writing a prescription, barely looking at her. Take these for the pain, try to reduce your stress levels, and follow up in 2 weeks if the symptoms persist. Letitia stared at him in disbelief. She had waited days for this appointment, endured hours of pain only to be dismissed in less than 10 minutes. She thought about arguing further, but the doctor's closed-off expression told her it would be pointless. As Dr. Reynolds handed her the prescription, she noticed he still hadn't really looked at her, not properly. His eyes had skimmed over her as if she were an inconvenience rather than a patient in pain. Is there any test you could run, just to be sure? She asked, making one last attempt. Tests are expensive and unnecessary for clear-cut cases like yours, he replied, already moving toward the door. Follow the treatment plan and you should feel better soon. As he turned to leave, Letitia heard him mutter something under his breath about these patients always thinking the worst. The comment wasn't clearly directed at her, but combined with his dismissive attitude, it left her feeling small and foolish. In the parking lot, Letitia sat in her car, clutching the useless prescription. Tears of frustration welled in her eyes. She knew her body, knew this wasn't normal, but the doctor had made her doubt herself. Was she overreacting? Was it really just stress? Her phone buzzed with a text from Andre. How did it go? What did the doctor say? Letitia hesitated. Andre would be furious if he knew how she'd been treated. As a civil rights attorney, he'd seen plenty of cases where black patients, especially women, had their concerns dismissed by medical professionals. But she didn't want to worry him when he was in the middle of an important case. Doctor says it's probably just stress, she texted back. Gave me some pain meds. The reply came quickly. That's it? No tests, nothing else? He didn't think they were necessary, she wrote, downplaying her frustration. The phone rang immediately. Andre wasn't buying it. Tell me exactly what happened, he said when she answered. Letitia sighed and recounted the appointment, including the doctor's dismissive attitude. Maybe he's right, she finished weakly. Maybe I'm just stressed. No. Andre's voice was firm. You know your body. If something feels wrong, then something is wrong. Did you get this doctor's name? Dr. Reynolds, she replied. But what does it matter? He's not going to change his mind. It matters because you deserve proper care, Andre said. Look, I have a meeting in 10 minutes, but I'm coming with you to your follow-up. And if the pain gets any worse before then, we're going straight to the emergency room, understand? Letitia nodded, then remembered he couldn't see her. Yes, she said quietly. I love you, Andre said, his voice softening. And I trust you when you say something's wrong, even if that doctor doesn't. After hanging up, Letitia sat for a moment longer in her car. The pain in her side throbbed steadily. She placed her hand over the spot, wondering what was happening inside her body and why Dr. Reynolds had been so quick to dismiss it. She thought about getting a second opinion but felt drained by the idea of explaining everything again to another doctor who might also not believe her. For now, she would try the medicine. But deep down, she knew this wasn't stress or an overactive imagination. Something was wrong, and if Dr. Reynolds wouldn't help her figure out what, she would find someone who would. She just hoped it wouldn't be too late by then. The next 2 weeks were a blur of pain for Letitia. The medication Dr. Reynolds prescribed did nothing to ease her suffering. If anything, her condition seemed to be getting worse each day. She tried to maintain her routine, teaching her third graders, grading papers in the evening, preparing dinner when she could stand long enough to cook. But by the weekend, even getting out of bed had become an ordeal. You need to call that doctor again, Andre insisted on Sunday morning when he found Letitia curled up in bed, her face pale and drawn. He placed a cool washcloth on her forehead, noticing how warm her skin felt. I think you have a fever, Letitia nodded weakly. I know, I just don't want to deal with him again. He made me feel like I was making a big deal out of nothing. Andre sat beside her on the bed, his face tight with concern. This isn't nothing. You've never been like this before. You haven't eaten properly in days, it was true. Food had become her enemy. Every time she tried to eat, waves of nausea would overtake her. Even water sometimes triggered painful cramps. She'd lost weight, her clothes hanging looser on her frame. I'll call tomorrow, she promised. Maybe I can see a different doctor. But by Monday morning, Letitia couldn't even stand up straight. The pain that had once been localized to her lower right abdomen now seemed to radiate throughout her entire midsection. When she tried to get up to use the bathroom, a wave of dizziness sent her back to the bed. Andre had already called in to work, telling them he needed to take a personal day. "That's it," he said, reaching for his phone. "We're not waiting for an appointment. I'm taking you to the emergency room." Letitia didn't argue. The thought of facing Dr. Reynolds again filled her with dread, but the pain had become too intense to bear. Every breath sent daggers through her side. The drive to the hospital was agonizing. Every bump in the road made Letitia wince. Andre kept glancing over at her, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Just hang on," he kept saying. "We're almost there." The emergency room was crowded, but one look at Letitia's face convinced the triage nurse that she needed immediate attention. "How long has she been like this?" the nurse asked Andre as they helped Letitia into a wheelchair. "The pain started about 5 weeks ago," Andre explained, "but it's gotten much worse in the last few days. She saw a doctor here 2 weeks ago, but he just gave her pain medication and sent her home." The nurse frowned. "Who was the doctor?" "Dr. Reynolds," Letitia managed to say, her voice thin with pain. Something flickered across the nurse's face, recognition, maybe even concern, but she quickly masked it. "Let's get you into a bed right away," she said, wheeling Letitia toward the treatment area. Things moved quickly after that. A different nurse took Letitia's vitals, frowning at the thermometer. 102.3, she murmured, making a note on her chart. "And your blood pressure is quite low." They put Letitia in a hospital gown and hooked her up to an IV for fluids. The cool liquid entering her veins provided a small measure of relief, but the pain remained relentless. A young doctor came in, not Reynolds, thankfully, and began asking questions about her symptoms. Andre stood by, adding details when Letitia couldn't speak. She saw Dr. Reynolds 2 weeks ago with the same symptoms, but he said it was just stress. The young doctor, Dr. Patel according to his badge, looked troubled. "Let me examine you," he said to Letitia. His touch was gentle but thorough, and when he pressed on her lower right abdomen, Letitia couldn't hold back a cry of pain. "I'm ordering blood tests and a CT scan," Dr. Patel said decisively. "Your symptoms are concerning, and we need to rule out several possibilities." For the first time in weeks, Letitia felt like someone was actually listening to her. Tears of relief mingled with tears of pain as they wheeled her away for the scan. Andre paced the small cubicle while they waited for results, occasionally stepping out to make calls, to Letitia's school to let them know she wouldn't be in, to his office to reschedule meetings, to their neighbors who had agreed to check on their house. His face was tight with worry and something else, anger, simmering just below the surface. 3 hours after their arrival, the curtain was pushed aside, and Dr. Patel returned with a tablet in hand. Behind him, to Letitia's dismay, was Dr. Reynolds. "Mrs. Johnson," Dr. Reynolds said, his tone overly formal. "I understand you're experiencing continued discomfort." Andre stepped forward. "Continued discomfort? My wife is in agony. She has a high fever and can barely stand." Dr. Reynolds glanced at Andre, then back at his tablet. "Yes, well, some patients have a lower threshold for—" "I've reviewed Mrs. Johnson's CT scan," Dr. Patel interrupted, his tone respectful but firm. "She has acute appendicitis, and the appendix appears to be on the verge of rupturing. There's also evidence of infection spreading into the peritoneum. She needs emergency surgery." The room fell silent. Dr. Reynolds's face remained impassive, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Are you certain?" he asked, reaching for the tablet. Her symptoms 2 weeks ago were consistent with gastritis or possibly IBS. "Women often—" "With all due respect, Dr. Reynolds," Dr. Patel said, "the scan is quite clear. This is a textbook case of advanced appendicitis, and the fact that it's been progressing for several weeks is concerning. Her blood work shows elevated white cell count consistent with infection." Andre looked between the two doctors, his expression darkening. "Are you saying this could have been diagnosed 2 weeks ago?" Dr. Patel hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with criticizing a senior colleague. Appendicitis can sometimes present atypically, but the symptoms my wife described to Dr. Reynolds are exactly what you'd expect with appendicitis, aren't they? Andre pressed. Dr. Patel didn't answer directly. We need to get Mrs. Johnson into surgery right away, he said instead. The risk of rupture is significant, and that would create a life-threatening situation. Dr. Reynolds cleared his throat. I'll make arrangements for the OR, he said stiffly, turning to leave. I want a different surgeon, Letitia said suddenly, her voice weak but determined. Not him. Dr. Reynolds turned back, his expression now openly annoyed. I'm the senior surgeon on call today, Mrs. Johnson. I assure you I'm perfectly capable of— You didn't believe me when I told you I was in pain, Letitia said, each word an effort. You didn't listen to me then. Why would I trust you to take care of me now? The tension in the room was palpable. Dr. Reynolds' jaw tightened, and he glanced at the nurse who had been checking Letitia's IV. These people always make a scene, he muttered, just loud enough to be heard. The nurse froze, her eyes widening. Andre stepped forward, his voice dangerously quiet. What did you just say? Dr. Reynolds straightened, suddenly aware of his mistake. I said patients in pain often become emotional, he backtracked. It's perfectly understandable. That's not what you said, Andre replied. And that's not what you meant. Dr. Patel cleared his throat. Dr. Cho is also on call today. She's an excellent surgeon with extensive experience in appendectomies. I'm sure she'd be available to take this case. Dr. Reynolds looked like he wanted to object, but the steady gaze of everyone in the room, Andre, Dr. Patel, the nurse, seemed to make him reconsider. Fine, he said curtly. I'll update the surgical team. He turned and left without another word. As soon as he was gone, Letitia let out a shaky breath. The nurse patted her hand. You'll be in good hands with Dr. Cho, she assured her. Andre was still staring at the door, his expression hard. Did you hear what he said? He asked Dr. Patel. The young doctor looked uncomfortable. I'm focused on getting your wife the care she needs right now, he said diplomatically. But if you have concerns about her previous treatment, there are channels to address those after she's recovered. The next hour passed in a blur of preparations. Letitia was given more medication for the pain and antibiotics for the infection. Dr. Cho, a calm, confident woman in her 40s, came to introduce herself and explain the procedure. The good news is we caught this before the appendix actually ruptured, she told them. But it's a close call. The infection has already started to spread, which will complicate your recovery. If it had been caught 2 weeks ago, Andre asked. Dr. Cho's expression was carefully neutral. It would have been a much simpler procedure with a faster recovery time, she admitted. But let's focus on the present. We're going to take good care of her now. As they prepared to wheel Letitia to the operating room, Andre leaned down to kiss her forehead. I'll be right here when you wake up, he promised. Letitia squeezed his hand weakly. I knew something was wrong, she whispered. I knew it. I know, baby. I know. Andre's voice was gentle, but his eyes were filled with a determined fire. Get better first. Then we'll deal with Dr. Reynolds. As they wheeled her away, Letitia caught a glimpse of Dr. Reynolds standing at the nurse's station, watching. Their eyes met briefly, and she saw something in his gaze. Not remorse or concern, but annoyance, as if her illness was an inconvenience to him, a challenge to his authority. Then the doors closed between them, and Letitia focused on the ceiling passing above her, on breathing through the pain, on surviving this crisis that could have been prevented if only someone had listened to her when she first said something was wrong. Andre sat in the waiting room, his body still, but his mind racing. The hard plastic chair dug into his back, but he barely noticed. His thoughts kept returning to the dismissive look on Dr. Reynolds' face, the casual cruelty of his muttered comment. These people always make a scene. The words echoed in Andre's head, fueling a slow-burning anger that was quickly overtaking his worry. A nurse had told him the surgery would take about an hour, maybe longer since the infection had spread. That gave him time to think, to plan. As a civil rights attorney, Andre had seen this pattern before. Black patients, especially black women, having their pain dismissed, their concerns ignored. He'd handled cases where such negligence led to serious harm, even death. But he'd never expected to be living through it with his own wife. He pulled out his phone and opened the voice recorder app. While the details were fresh in his mind, he began to speak quietly, documenting everything. Letitia's first appointment with Dr. Reynolds, his dismissal of her symptoms, today's events in the emergency room, and most importantly, that damning comment. He noted the names of everyone present, Dr. Patel, the nurses, even the time of day. Evidence. He would need evidence. Mr. Johnson? Andre looked up to see Dr. Cho standing before him, still in her surgical scrubs. He jumped to his feet. How is she? Is Letitia okay? Dr. Cho's expression was serious but not grim. Your wife is in recovery now. The surgery was successful, but it was more complicated than a typical appendectomy. The appendix was severely inflamed and had begun to rupture. We were able to remove it before it fully burst, but the infection had already spread to the surrounding tissue. Andre's throat tightened. But she'll be all right? She's going to need some time to recover, Dr. Cho explained. We've started her on strong antibiotics to fight the infection. She'll need to stay in the hospital for at least 5 days, possibly longer, depending on how quickly the infection responds to treatment. And if her appendix had been removed 2 weeks ago, when she first came in? Andre couldn't help asking. Dr. Cho hesitated, choosing her words carefully. In a case of early appendicitis, the surgery is much simpler, the recovery much faster. Typically, a patient might go home the next day with minimal complications. Andre nodded slowly. When can I see her? She's in post-op now. Once she's moved to a room, a nurse will come get you. It should be about 30 minutes. After Dr. Cho left, Andre sank back into his chair, relief washing over him. Letitia would be okay. She would recover. But the knowledge that her suffering could have been prevented, that her life had been put at risk by one doctor's negligence and prejudice, rekindled his anger. He pulled out his phone again and began to search for the hospital's patient advocacy office. Every hospital had one, though they weren't always effective. It would be a starting point at least. Then he searched for the state medical board's complaint procedure. As the pages loaded, he made a mental list of people to call, colleagues who specialized in medical malpractice, contacts at local news stations, community organizers who had been documenting cases of medical racism. By the time a nurse came to take him to Letitia's room, Andre had the beginnings of a plan. Letitia looked small in the hospital bed, her skin ashen against the white sheets. IV tubes ran from her arm, delivering antibiotics and fluids. Her eyes were closed, but they fluttered open as Andre approached. Hey, she whispered, her voice rough from the breathing tube they'd used during surgery. Andre took her hand, careful of the IV. Hey yourself. How are you feeling? Like someone cut me open and took out an organ, she said with a weak smile. But better than before. Andre chuckled, the sound catching in his throat. You had us worried. Us? Your mom's on her way. So is your sister. I called them after you went into surgery. Letitia nodded, closing her eyes briefly. Good. Andre stroked her hand, noticing how fragile it felt. Dr. Cho said the surgery went well, but you'll need to stay here for a few days because of the infection. Did they say anything about him? Letitia didn't need to specify who she meant. Andre's jaw tightened. Not yet, but they will. I'm going to make sure of it. Letitia studied his face. What are you planning? Before Andre could answer, there was a knock at the door. Dr. Patel entered, looking slightly uncomfortable. Mrs. Johnson, I wanted to check in and see how you're doing post-surgery. She's in pain, Andre answered, not bothering to hide the edge in his voice. Dr. Patel nodded. That's to be expected. We can adjust your pain medication if needed. He moved to the end of the bed and picked up Letitia's chart. Your vitals are stable, which is good. The antibiotics should start working on the infection soon. Letitia watched him, noting the tension in his shoulders. Thank you for believing me, she said quietly. For ordering the tests. Dr. Patel looked up, his expression softening. I was just doing my job, Mrs. Johnson. Unlike Dr. Reynolds, Andre said. Dr. Patel glanced toward the door as if checking to see if anyone was listening. Look, I'm not supposed to comment on another doctor's treatment decisions, but he took a deep breath. What happened to you was unacceptable. The symptoms you described in your initial visit, they're textbook signs of appendicitis. Any first-year medical student would have recognized them. Andre leaned forward. Would you be willing to put that in writing? Dr. Patel hesitated. I could face repercussions. So could the next patient Dr. Reynolds decides doesn't deserve proper care, Andre countered. The next black woman whose pain he dismisses. Letitia reached out to touch Andre's arm. He's right to be cautious. Hospitals protect their own. Dr. Patel seemed to come to a decision. I can't promise anything official right now, but I can tell you this isn't the first time I've seen Dr. Reynolds make questionable judgment calls with certain patients. Certain patients? Andre pressed. Minorities, Dr. Patel said simply, especially women of color. I've noticed a pattern in how he treats them versus his white patients. Andre pulled out his business card and handed it to Dr. Patel. If you decide you want to do the right thing, call me. I'm a civil rights attorney, and I promise you this isn't going to just go away. Dr. Patel pocketed the card without comment, finished checking Letitia's vitals and left the room. You're going after him, aren't you? Letitia asked once they were alone. Andre nodded. Not just for you, for everyone he's done this to, for everyone he might do it to in the future if nobody stops him. Letitia squeezed his hand. What's the plan? First, we document everything while it's fresh. I've already started recording the details. He pulled out his phone and began taking photos of Letitia in the hospital bed, the IV lines, the surgical dressings. We'll request all your medical records from both visits. I'll file complaints with the hospital administration and the state medical board. Will that be enough? Letitia asked. Andre's expression hardened. It's just the beginning. Dr. Patel hinted that there are other cases. We'll find them. I'll reach out to my network, find other patients who've had similar experiences with Reynolds. If there's a pattern of racial bias in his treatment decisions, we can build a case that even the hospital can't ignore. Letitia watched him, a mix of emotions crossing her face, pride, concern, exhaustion. It's going to be a fight. One worth having, Andre said firmly. But right now you focus on getting better. Let me worry about Reynolds. Over the next few days, while Letitia began her slow recovery, Andre worked methodically. He filed a formal complaint with the hospital's patient advocacy office, detailing Dr. Reynolds' dismissal of Letitia's symptoms and his racist comment. He requested all of Letitia's medical records and began compiling a timeline of events. When he wasn't at the hospital with Letitia, he was making calls to colleagues, to community organizations, to patient advocacy groups. Word began to spread. By the third day, he'd received calls from 4 other patients who claimed Dr. Reynolds had dismissed their symptoms or treated them with contempt. 2 were black women, 1 was a Hispanic man, and 1 was an elderly Asian woman. All had stories disturbingly similar to Letitia's. Andre was at his home office organizing the growing pile of statements and documents when his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. Andre Johnson speaking. Mr. Johnson, this is Maya Wilson. I'm a nurse at City Hospital. Andre sat up straighter. Yes, Ms. Wilson, how can I help you? I heard you're looking into Dr. Reynolds. Her voice was low, cautious. I've worked with him for 6 years. What happened to your wife? It wasn't an isolated incident. I'm beginning to see that, Andre replied carefully. Would you be willing to talk about what you've witnessed? There was a long pause. I could lose my job. I understand the risk, Andre said. But without people willing to speak up, nothing changes. And patients like my wife continue to suffer. Another pause. I have documentation, Maya finally said. Notes I've kept over the years. Times when I reported concerns about Dr. Reynolds' treatment of minority patients. Nothing ever came of those reports. They were buried. Andre's heart raced. This could be the breakthrough they needed. Ms. Wilson, I can't tell you how important your testimony could be. Can we meet? Not at the hospital, she said quickly, and not anywhere public. They arranged to meet the following day at a coffee shop in a neighboring town, where they were unlikely to be recognized. When Andre returned to the hospital later that evening, Letitia was sitting up in bed, some color finally returning to her cheeks. Her mother was arranging flowers on the windowsill while her sister flipped through a magazine in the corner chair. You look better, Andre said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. I feel better, Letitia confirmed. Dr. Cho says the infection is responding to the antibiotics. If my blood work continues to improve, I might go home in a couple of days. That's wonderful news, Andre said, the relief evident in his voice, but beneath the relief was a steely determination. He had spent days gathering evidence, making connections, building a case. Soon he would have enough to act. Dr. Reynolds had no idea what was coming for him. The coffee shop was tucked away on a quiet street in the neighboring town, far enough from the hospital that Andre wasn't likely to run into anyone who might recognize him. He arrived 15 minutes early, ordered a black coffee, and chose a table in the back corner where he could see the door. Maya Wilson arrived precisely on time. She was a woman in her mid-40s with close-cropped gray hair and the quick, efficient movements of someone who had spent decades on her feet. She scanned the room before approaching Andre's table, a large tote bag clutched tightly against her side. "Mr. Johnson?" she asked quietly. Andre stood and extended his hand. "Thank you for coming. Can I get you something to drink?" "No, thank you. I can't stay long." Maya sat down, placing her bag on the floor between her feet. "I'm on shift in 2 hours." Andre nodded, understanding her caution. "I appreciate you taking this risk. Letitia, my wife, she's doing better, but what happened to her shouldn't happen to anyone else." "It already has," Maya said, her voice steady but quiet. "Many times." She reached into her bag and pulled out a thin notebook with a worn black cover. "I started keeping track 4 years ago. At first, it was just for my own records to back up the complaints I filed with nursing administration. But after the third complaint disappeared without action, I realized something bigger was happening." Andre leaned forward. "What kind of records are these?" "Dates, patient names, first names only for privacy, basic demographics, presenting symptoms, Reynolds diagnosis, and then what actually happened to the patient. In many cases, I followed up because I was concerned." She opened the notebook, turning to a page marked with a paperclip. "Like this case. Hispanic woman, early 30s, came in with severe chest pain. Reynolds diagnosed anxiety, prescribed a mild sedative. 3 days later, she was back with a massive heart attack. She survived, but with permanent heart damage." Andre's jaw tightened. "And if she'd been properly diagnosed the first time, she might have avoided the damage entirely." "And here?" Maya flipped to another marked page. "Black man, mid-50s, complaining of shortness of breath. Reynolds said it was probably just asthma. Didn't order any tests. Patient ended up in the ICU 2 days later with pulmonary embolism. Nearly died." "And you reported these cases?" Maya nodded. "Every single one. I went through proper channels. Nursing supervisor, then department head, then hospital administration. The first few times I was told they would look into it. After that, I started getting warnings about being a troublemaker. My last performance review noted that I had difficulty working collaboratively with the medical team." Andre wasn't surprised. "Institutions protected themselves first. May I see the notebook?" Maya hesitated, then slid it across the table. "I made a copy just in case." "This is the original." Andre carefully flipped through the pages. Maya had documented 37 cases over 4 years. The pattern was unmistakable. Patients of color had their symptoms dismissed, were prescribed less effective treatments, or were sent home without proper testing at significantly higher rates than white patients with similar complaints. "This is incredibly thorough," Andre said, his voice thick with emotion. "And damning. There's more," Maya said. She reached into her bag again and pulled out a manila folder. "These are copies of emails I sent to administration, and their responses or lack thereof. I also have the statistics from our department. Reynolds orders advanced imaging for white patients at nearly twice the rate he does for patients of color. His pain medication prescriptions show similar disparities." Andre looked at her with newfound respect. "You've been building a case all along." Maya's expression hardened. "I became a nurse to help people, to ease suffering. What Reynolds does, it goes against everything medicine should stand for. But I'm just one nurse. They don't listen to me." "They'll listen now," Andre promised. "With your documentation and the other patients coming forward, we have enough to force an investigation." "What's your plan?" Maya asked. Andre laid it out for her. "First, a formal complaint to the state medical board, documenting the pattern of negligence and racial bias. Simultaneously, a letter to the hospital board of directors, bypassing the administration that had been burying the complaints. Then, if necessary, media pressure. He had contacts at local news stations who would be interested in this story. And if all else fails," Andre finished, "a lawsuit, not just for Letitia, but a class action on behalf of all the patients who suffered because of Reynolds' bias." Maya nodded slowly. "I want to help, but I can't lose my job. I'm a single mom with 2 kids in college." "I understand," Andre assured her. We can keep your identity confidential as long as possible, and if it does come to a point where you need to speak publicly, there are whistleblower protections. Plus, he added with a grim smile, any retaliation would only strengthen our case. They talked for another 30 minutes, going through the details in Maya's notebook, identifying the most egregious cases, the ones with the clearest evidence of bias. By the time Maya had to leave for her shift, they had the outline of a strategy. Thank you, Andre said as they stood to leave. What you're doing takes real courage. Maya shook her head. What takes courage is what those patients went through. What your wife went through. I'm just doing what's right. Back at the hospital, Letitia was having her bandages changed when Andre arrived. The incision was healing well, but the area around it was still red and tender from the infection. Dr. Cho had confirmed that morning that Letitia could go home the next day, as long as she continued to take oral antibiotics and came back for regular checkups. How was your meeting? Letitia asked once the nurse had left. Andre closed the door before answering. Better than I expected. Maya's been documenting Reynolds' pattern of discrimination for years. She has names, dates, outcomes, all of it. Letitia's eyes widened. And she's willing to share that information? She already has. Andre patted his briefcase. She gave me her original notebook, and statistical data showing Reynolds orders fewer tests and prescribes less pain medication for patients of color. That's huge, Letitia said, struggling to sit up straighter. What's the next step? I've already drafted complaints to the State Medical Board and the Hospital Board of Directors. I'm sending them tomorrow once I incorporate the new information from Maya. Andre sat on the edge of the bed taking Letitia's hand. And I've heard from 6 more patients since yesterday. The word is spreading. Letitia squeezed his hand. You're really doing this. We're really doing this, Andre corrected. Every patient who comes forward, every healthcare worker who speaks up, they're all part of this. It's bigger than just us now, and it was. By the time Letitia was discharged the next day, Andre had received calls or emails from 15 former patients, all with stories similar to Letitia's. 3 more nurses had reached out, cautiously offering to corroborate Maya's accounts. A patient advocate from another hospital had contacted him, saying she'd worked with Reynolds years ago and had witnessed the same behavior then. What had begun as one man's anger over his wife's mistreatment was growing into something much larger, a movement to expose a system that allowed prejudice to influence medical care, that protected doctors like Reynolds at the expense of vulnerable patients. The morning after Letitia came home, Andre drove to the post office and mailed thick envelopes to the State Medical Board and each member of the hospital's board of directors. The envelopes contained the formal complaints, supporting documentation, patient testimonials, and Maya's statistical evidence, all carefully organized and annotated with relevant medical ethics codes and anti-discrimination laws. Then he made 2 phone calls. The first was to Lisa Chen, a reporter at the local news station with whom he'd worked on a housing discrimination story the previous year. She listened intently as he outlined the case against Reynolds, asking sharp questions and taking detailed notes. This is exactly the kind of story we need to be covering, Lisa said when he finished. Healthcare disparities affect everyone, but they're often invisible to the public. Would your wife be willing to be interviewed? Having a face and a personal story makes these issues real for viewers. Andre promised to ask Letitia and get back to her. The second call was to Dr. Patel, who had given Andre his personal number before Letitia was discharged. I've been thinking about what you said, Dr. Patel told him. About the next patient. I can't live with that on my conscience. Does that mean you're willing to go on record? Andre asked. Yes, Dr. Patel said firmly. I've already documented the specific cases I've witnessed. It may cost me professionally, but staying silent would cost me more personally. By the end of the week, the wheels were in motion. The medical board had acknowledged receipt of the complaint and promised a thorough investigation. The hospital board had been more reticent, sending only a brief email confirming they would review the materials provided. But Andre wasn't deterred. If institutional channels failed, he was prepared for the next phase. Letitia watched her husband's determination with a mixture of pride and concern. She was healing physically, the pain lessening each day, her strength slowly returning. But the emotional impact of having her suffering dismissed, of being treated as less worthy of care because of her race, would take longer to process. Are you sure you want to do the interview? Andre asked her as they sat on their porch swing one evening, a week after her discharge. It will mean going public with everything, opening ourselves up to scrutiny. Letitia was quiet for a moment, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. If I don't speak up, who will? My story might help someone else get proper treatment. It might make another doctor think twice before dismissing a black woman's pain. Andre put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. That's what I thought you'd say. Letitia leaned into him. When is the interview? Next Tuesday. Lisa wants to film here, if that's okay with you. She thinks seeing you in your home as a teacher and a person, not just a patient, will help viewers connect with the story. Letitia nodded. And what about Reynolds? Has there been any response from him directly? Andre's expression darkened. Not yet, but he knows what's coming. The hospital administrator called me today, trying to arrange a private meeting to discuss our concerns. I told him we're well past the point of private meetings. This is about systemic change, not a settlement. He won't go down without a fight, Letitia warned. Good, Andre replied, his voice steady and determined, because neither will we. The day of the interview, Letitia sat nervously on her living room couch, smoothing the fabric of her dress over and over. She'd chosen to wear a simple blue dress, professional but approachable, the kind she might wear to parent-teacher conferences. Her surgical incision was still healing, a reminder of how close she'd come to a much worse outcome. You don't have to do this, Andre reminded her, sitting beside her and taking her hand. We can cancel if you're not feeling up to it. Letitia shook her head. No, I need to do this. For all the women who weren't believed. For all the patients who might face the same thing tomorrow. When Lisa Chen arrived with her camera operator, she took time to make Letitia comfortable, explaining how the interview would flow, where to look, and assuring her they could stop at any time if she needed a break. We want to tell your story honestly, Lisa explained. No sensationalism, just the truth about what happened to you and what's happening to others. Once the cameras were rolling, Letitia spoke clearly and directly about her experience. She described the pain, Dr. Reynolds' dismissal of her symptoms, and the emergency surgery that could have been avoided with proper care. Her voice trembled only once when she recounted hearing the doctor mutter, "These people always make a scene." In that moment, I wasn't a person to him, she said. I was a category, a stereotype, and that stereotype nearly cost me my life. Andre spoke next, explaining the pattern they had uncovered with help from hospital staff and other patients. Without naming Maya or Dr. Patel, he referenced multiple healthcare professionals who have come forward with evidence of systematic bias in treatment decisions. This isn't about one bad doctor, Andre emphasized. This is about a system that allows bias to influence medical care, that protects those in power even when patients are harmed. The interview aired 3 days later, during the evening news. By the following morning, the story had gone viral. Local news websites were flooded with comments from people sharing similar experiences. The hospital's social media accounts were overwhelmed with demands for action. Several more former patients contacted Andre, bringing the total to 27. 2 days after the broadcast, Andre received a call from the chair of the hospital's board of directors. Mr. Johnson, I think we need to meet in person to discuss this situation, the chair said, his voice carefully neutral. I'm listening, Andre replied. The board has reviewed your complaint and the accompanying documentation. We've also seen the news report. We take these allegations extremely seriously. Andre wasn't impressed. Serious enough to finally do something about it? Because according to our evidence, complaints about Dr. Reynolds have been dismissed for years. There was a pause. We'd like to meet with you and your wife tomorrow at 10 a.m. We'll have representatives from administration, the chief of medicine, and our legal team present. My legal team will be there as well, Andre countered. And I want Maya Wilson and Dr. Patel included in the meeting. Another pause, longer this time. That can be arranged. The next morning, Andre and Letitia arrived at the hospital's administrative offices hand in hand. Andre wore his best suit, Letitia a smart pantsuit that hid the still healing incision on her abdomen. They were shown to a large conference room where 8 people already sat around a polished wooden table. On one side sat the hospital representatives, the board chair, the chief of medicine, the hospital's legal counsel, and the head administrator. On the other side were Maya, Dr. Patel, and two of Andre's colleagues from the civil rights law firm where he worked. The board chair opened the meeting with a carefully worded statement about the hospital's commitment to equal care for all patients. Andre noticed that he avoided any direct mention of racism or bias. "We've conducted our own internal review of the cases brought to our attention," the chair continued. "And while we acknowledge that there may have been some inconsistencies in care, we cannot conclusively determine that these were the result of racial bias." Andre exchanged a glance with his colleagues. This was the response they had expected: minimize, deflect, avoid admitting liability. "With all due respect," Andre said, opening his briefcase and pulling out a thick folder, "we're not here to debate whether bias existed. The evidence speaks for itself. We're here to discuss what you're going to do about it." He slid copies of a document across the table to each hospital representative. "This is our proposed remediation plan. It includes immediate action items as well as long-term structural changes to address bias in patient care." The hospital's legal counsel picked up the document, scanning it quickly. Her eyebrows rose. "This is quite extensive." "So is the harm that's been done," Letitia said quietly, speaking for the first time since the meeting began. All eyes turned to her. "I nearly died because a doctor didn't believe me. How many others have suffered because of the same attitude? How many didn't survive to tell their stories?" The room fell silent. The chief of medicine, a woman in her 60s with short gray hair, looked directly at Letitia. "You're right," she said simply. "And as the person ultimately responsible for the standard of care in this hospital, I owe you an apology." The hospital's legal counsel looked alarmed, but the chief of medicine continued. "We failed you and others like you. And while I can't speak for the board about all the items in this proposal, I can tell you that as of this morning, Dr. Reynolds has been suspended pending the completion of the State Medical Board's investigation." "That's a start," Andre acknowledged, "but it's not enough." The negotiation that followed lasted for hours. The hospital representatives initially balked at many of the proposed changes: mandatory bias training for all staff, a new patient advocacy office focused specifically on addressing disparities in care, regular audits of treatment decisions broken down by patient demographics, a formal review process for complaints about discriminatory care. But Andre and his team had come prepared. For each objection, they presented evidence, statistics, and case studies showing how similar measures had been implemented successfully at other hospitals. Maya provided first-hand accounts of how bias affected daily treatment decisions. Dr. Patel spoke about the subtle ways racism manifested in medical settings, often unconsciously, and Letitia, when she spoke, brought the issue back to its human core. "This isn't about policies or procedures," she said at one point. "It's about people's lives. It's about whether a woman who looks like me can walk into this hospital and trust that her pain will be taken seriously." By late afternoon, they had reached a tentative agreement. The hospital would implement most of the proposed changes, starting with the immediate formation of a task force on equitable care that would include Maya, Dr. Patel, and other staff members who had come forward. They would commission an independent audit of treatment disparities, and they would create a new patient advocacy position specifically focused on addressing complaints about bias or discrimination. "There's one more thing," Andre said as the meeting was winding down. "This can't be done in secret. The problems happen publicly, and the solutions need to be public too." The hospital representatives exchanged glances. "What exactly are you proposing?" the board chair asked. "A community forum," Andre replied, "open to the public. The hospital acknowledges the problems that have occurred and presents its plan to address them. Patients get a chance to share their experiences, and it all happens in the open, not behind closed doors." More negotiation followed, but eventually the hospital agreed, with some conditions about the format and structure of the event. As they left the meeting, Letitia leaned heavily on Andre's arm. The long hours of tense discussion had drained her still recovering body. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She nodded. "Just tired. But good tired, like we accomplished something important." "We did," he assured her. "This is just the beginning, but it's a real beginning." The State Medical Board's investigation took another 3 months. In the end, they found substantial evidence of bias affecting treatment decisions and suspended Dr. Reynolds' medical license for 6 months. He was required to complete comprehensive training on cultural competency and implicit bias before he could apply for reinstatement. He would also be subject to monitoring and regular review of his patient care decisions for 2 years after returning to practice. By then, the changes at the hospital were already well underway. The task force had completed its initial review and implemented new protocols for pain assessment and treatment. The bias training program was being rolled out department by department. The new patient advocate had already handled dozens of cases, ensuring that complaints were properly addressed rather than buried. The community forum, held in the hospital's large auditorium, drew hundreds of people. Patients shared their stories, some tearful, some angry, all powerful. Hospital leaders outlined their commitment to change. Healthcare workers, including Maya and Dr. Patel, spoke about their responsibility to identify and challenge bias in medical settings. Letitia was the final speaker. 6 months after her ordeal, she stood straight and strong at the podium. The physical scars were healing. The emotional ones would take longer, but standing up and speaking out was part of that healing process. What happened to me shouldn't happen to anyone, she told the crowd. But the reality is that it happens every day, in hospitals across this country. Black pain is downplayed. Black symptoms are dismissed. Black lives are put at risk because of bias and stereotypes. She looked out at the sea of faces, patients and doctors, nurses and administrators, community members and reporters. Today isn't about blame. It's about change, real change, the kind that saves lives. As she returned to her seat, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Andre took her hand, squeezing it gently. They had transformed their personal tragedy into a catalyst for change, their private pain into a public reckoning. It wasn't a perfect ending. Bias wouldn't disappear overnight, and there would be resistance to some of the changes. But it was a beginning, a step toward a healthcare system that truly served everyone equally, that saw patients as people first, not categories or stereotypes. And for Letitia, there was healing in that too. The knowledge that her suffering might prevent someone else's, that her voice had been heard not just for herself, but for all those who had been silenced by a system that refused to listen.